Hello and welcome to Final Fantasy II, the retrospective second part of the Final Fantasy Marathon from the channel A Friend Remembers, and why you should play this game. Honestly, of all of the Final Fantasy games in this marathon of the mainline series, the second game in the series is possibly the hardest to recommend as having its own unique selling points. It's still originally an 8-bit video game. It was originally made in 1988 for the Nintendo Entertainment System, and even though there's a lot of ports and remasters that have improved the graphics, none of them have deviated that far from the original very basic design of this entry. It took the combat and the overworld explanation from the original game and tried to tell a much more deep, much more complex, much more entwined story. On that front it was successful, but it also innovated in several other areas which created some deeply ingrained flaws that hold the game back, but do in turn make it unique. Why is this game worth picking up? Well, if you've played any of the other Final Fantasy games and you enjoyed them, you know what you're getting in for with this one. It's got an overworld and combat encounters that you vary back and forth between. Unlike the first game, the overworld is not so much a series of fetch quests as it is a series of storyline beats where you're sent from city to town, acting as forward guards or scouts or treasure hunters for the Resistance. This is the first game in the series where you can see it leaning into a Star Wars themed epic adventure, a small band of heroes up against the mighty Empire and the evil, magic infused villains at the top of that. You have 3 core characters, Firion, Maria and Guy, who lead you through these quests, and from the majority of the game you'll be accompanied by one of a series of 6 revolving side characters who fill in that 4th final character slot. Now this is slightly problematic because it's these 4th characters who seem to have all of the personality. The game does quite a good job of introducing them to you, making you briefly care about them and their personal wants and desires and unique attributes for just a few minutes, and then cycling them out to make room for another incoming character. The 3 characters that you're lumbered with, Firion, Maria and Guy, don't have much personality of their own. Firion is an open everyman, a fighter. He cares deeply about his missing family, and he's nearly seduced by a beautiful woman at one point in the game who turns out to have had nefarious purposes. That's about all there is to say about him. Maria is Firion's and Guy's childhood friends. She cares deeply about them and she sees some horrible things happen, and she is sad about the things she has seen. The technology of the time, the storytelling and narrative at the time just didn't give it the scope and the ability for the programmers to quest deeply into what Firion and Guy's thoughts were of the events. It's perhaps telling that the most fleshed out of these 3 characters is Guy, a friend of Firion who was raised by wild animals before being taken in by Maria and Leon's parents. He's got a very basic grasp of human language, so he doesn't say very much, but he can speak Beaver, which is just so out there and hilarious it's become a meme in its own right. Maria has a missing brother who you actually meet at the very start of the game. The story tries to start with all guns blazing. It introduces you the Empire attacking your city, and you, the 3 characters and a 4th one called Leon, Maria's older brother, are fleeing from the town. You're ambushed by the soldiers of the Empire, and the very first combat battle of the game is a loss. You cannot win, you are defeated. The soldiers beat you. Leon goes missing and the 3 of you are revived by the rebellion. You've been found nearly at the point of death. Leon is missing. Firion, Maria and Guy set out to try and do something to fight back against the Empire and find their missing brother. You're accompanied by a white mage, by a monk, by a dragoon, by a pirate. There's a whole range of characters who are dispatched to join you for select missions of the game to give you that 4th character slot. But as you level up, these 4th characters largely won't have the skills they need to compete. They won't be leveled up to the same effect as your characters are. So really you need to rely on the 3 characters that you can customize to get through the majority of this game. And that is the nub of where the combat system of Final Fantasy II falls down. It tried something that is laudably unique. It's not been repeated in the mainline Final Fantasy series. The game will scale your abilities and level you up as you commit to actions. So the more you fight, the more stronger your characters will become. They will exercise, they will level up, and they will become stronger and they will hit harder. Conversely, the more you are hit and pummeled and then heal yourself, your characters will build up their stamina and become more robust and able to take more hits in the future. When it's working well, this game is encouraging you to use magic regularly. One of the problems in the first game was that the mages had very limited munitions, so you wanted to reserve their spells for special occasions to get out of very difficult slots. That's not what the second game wants you to do. It wants you to be much more liberal at applying your magic, and the more you train one of your characters to use the magic, the more MP, magic points, that character will have, and the harder the magic will hit when you target enemies. The more you do, the better you become at doing it. It's not a bad idea, and it's a simple system that's been taken on by open world RPGs made by companies like Bethesda. This is the system that games like Elder Scrolls, Morrowind, Oblivion, Skyrim would build and perfect into massive, immersive experiences. But in a narrative-driven 2D 8-bit RPG, it's very constraining. It essentially means that if you want to proceed through the game, you are going to have to grind, and grind hard. You're going to have to take on a large number of random battles in order to level up, and you're going to have to take the losses, go back to the towns, heal, revive your characters in churches and temples, and slowly power your characters up to the point where they can take on the bosses. There are a lot more bosses in this game, particularly in the latter half of the game. They've been powered up considerably compared to the 4 fiends in the original game. There's a lot to enjoy here. The combat is more complex than the first game. It's still based on the you take a turn, enemy takes a turn, and only once everyone's had a go do you get to choose new actions, and then everyone has another go, and then you choose new actions. But there's a larger range of stuff you can do. You're not limited to job classes at the very start of the game like you were in Final Fantasy 1. You get to customize your characters by equipping them with any items, any weapons, any armor that you choose. You have rows now. You can put them in the front row, where they're up in the face of the enemy, but they will conversely take more damage. Or if you have archers or spellcasters, put them in the back row so they are protected from the attacks of the enemy. They receive less damage, but they are restricted to only using long-range weapons if they want to fight back effectively. These are good, innovative systems, only let down by the extreme amount of grinding the game is going to require you to put in to pass through. Fortunately, if you just play through the Pixel Remaster version of the game that I'm playing through, without skipping any enemies by turning off the random battle encounters off, you will probably encounter enough enemies to power up to where you need to be as you progress. The dungeons are much longer than they were in the first game, and they're much more complicated. There's an annoyingly large precedent for floors having multiple doorways that don't lead anywhere. They lead into empty rooms, which are just there to encourage a monster to ambush you, to lead you into an attack, so you have to fight, make your way back out into the corridor, search for the right door. It's not annoying the first time it happens, it's not too annoying the second, but pretty much every dungeon in the game has these myriad of doors 1, doors 2, door 3, which door's the right one. There's nothing to tell you where you should go. It's just trial and error, and it's just there to try and force you into more battles to level up your characters. If you enjoy the combat, that's absolutely fine. However, it doesn't have the purity and the simplicity of the first game. The system still isn't as nuanced as it would go on to be in later games. Storyline wise, there's a lot of ambition here in terms of the Empire and what they're up to. There's good and interesting intrigue in the fact that they're always a step ahead of you. There's storyline beats about them building an enormous airship to try and conquer the world by raining in death from above. You have the first meeting with the character Sid, an airship mechanic who has his own thing that will allow you to fight back. There's a princess you have to rescue. There are storylines involving the last dragon egg. The dragons have been wiped out by the Empire, but there's one survivor and a baby that you can recruit. What happened to Leon, Maria's older brother? The final twist regarding the Emperor, the big bad in charge of this army, he's a surprisingly weak character at first, but then he comes back in a big and epic way. Just as the final twist of Final Fantasy 1 had a strange time travel trope that pulled the rug out from underneath your feet, this one does something very similar, involving the forces of hell coming out from the underworld to reclaim the earth. It's not that there's not a lot of ambition here, and it's not that there's nothing exciting going on, but the game is just relentlessly pessimistic. Cities and towns will literally be bombed into oblivion, and by the end of the game there aren't actually that many places from the early game you can revisit. it's storyline driven. However, there's not much meat on the bones here to get you to empathise with Firion, Maria, Guy and Leon's storyline. I cared more about the characters that we lost upon the way. This game has the first character NPC death in a Final Fantasy game, and the first time it happens it's tragic, but by the end of the game I just wanted it to be over. Honestly, this marathon of every Final Fantasy mainline title almost could have ended at the second game. I got through it. If you put the hours in to grind the characters up, you actually almost can cheat by just having your characters target each other. Find a weak enemy in the earlier part of the game, attack yourselves, heal yourselves, get your characters leveled up, and then you can steamroll through the second half of the game. But even after doing that, I just found the final boss, the final dungeon, the final boss was healing himself far quicker than my characters could deal the damage. And that was partly because there are missable items and weapons. There are treasure chests that if you don't claim for an area before the Empire comes and bombs it to the ground, or before the island is sucked back into the ocean, you can never go back there. You can never reclaim that item. You can never get the blood sword, an absolutely amazing weapon that can make the final boss a joke if you remember to retrieve it from where it was hidden. I at first applauded the idea of hidden paths, that you had to go to a certain part of a room, a certain part of a map, and if you walk into the wall there you can slip through and find treasure chests hidden behind. That's an interesting idea, but when you combine that with the fact that some towns and cities and dungeons cannot be revisited, and if you didn't or search for those hidden passages and treasure chests in your first visit, you'll never be able to come back. It just becomes a slightly aggravating experience. One that in the modern day and age, you're almost required to have a guidebook online, a walkthrough, to hold your hand if you want to get the true experience. And that doesn't feel right. Those are my irritations at Final Fantasy 2, but there's a lot to love here. I like the ambition. Once you've put a few hours of grinding in, there is a solid storyline game here. It's got all of the strengths of the first game. It does some stuff a little bit more engagingly. It is innovative. It is exciting. This is the one game, and I've played over half the games in the series in this marathon now. This is the only one where I kind of wished I'd turned the boosters on and allowed my characters to level up quicker, but I didn't do that. I tried to stick to the true experience. So that would be my one recommendation. Don't be afraid of the boosters. Let your characters level up just that little bit quicker than the game demands of you. There's some fun to be had here, but don't let grinding stand between you and the enjoyment that this game does potentially have to offer.